Hello and welcome to Intersections. My guests today are Don and Trudy Barnes. I've been at St. John's Citadel for a very long time and have recently entered the world of retirement and exploring all that that has to offer for them as time passes. So we're going to get to know them just a little bit better over the course of the next few minutes. Welcome.
Oh, our pleasure.
So, St. John's Citadel. You, Trudy, were born into it and raised through it.
Yep.
And you have some responsibility for bringing this gentleman along
All
to
the
it as well. All the responsibility. So would you just start us off by talking about your early memories, childhood at St. John's Citadel, your engagement, involvement at that time, and, you know, recognizing childlike faith, what we first understand as a young child, what that may be. How did that begin to impact you?
Well, I, as you said, since I was born, was brought to the Citadel every Sunday.
Yep.
But my father never got saved till I was probably 13, and that's when we really got involved in the church. So I was a little older.
I remember that.
Right, by that time. My brothers, the youngest in particular, got more of this when you were young part. For me, it was more of a teenage thing.
Okay.
So even though we were coming every Sunday, and we had a strong influence, Brigadier Peach was my influence until I was 10 when she died. So she brought a lot of faith into the family and a lot of spiritual leadership through that time. And I spent a lot of time having a cup of tea in her room and listening very much intently during that time. But my involvement with the church really started more in my teenage years when Dad was involved. And you know, one of the things I struggled with was looking and assuming that everybody must have to be perfect, and knowing as a teenager I wasn't perfect.
No.
And really struggled with my faith through that whole teenage years. You know, I would see one thing on Sunday and then I'd see something else at school all week long. And you know, I tried to be involved as much as I could. I mean, Dr. Eric Abbott was always at me, you know, join the band, join the songsters, all that type of thing. But I really struggled through that time. And I'd say it was well into my 20s, probably after we got married or just before, when my faith really returned to what it had been as a child. And that came from me putting it aside and realizing everybody's not perfect, and that it's not for me to judge, and everybody's not going to say and do what I expect to be done.
Right.
But that's not for me to judge. That's the Lord to judge, and I have to worry about what I'm doing.
Yeah, we don't measure ourselves by looking at each other.
Right.
We have one standard,
Right.
the gold standard, which is the Lord Himself. But you know, you raise a good point that those who are watching us may be of the view that, well, you know, that everybody in church is just, you know, wonderful. Everything is great. It's kind of like that Leave It to Beaver family from years ago on television. That dates me.
Yeah.
But it's not true. It's a journey.
Yeah.
And you know, every day we come across instances and circumstances in our lives that cause us to doubt, cause us to question, and hopefully through the perseverance and keeping your eye on the goal, you know, helps you come out a little stronger in the end.
Yeah, and I think the strongest thing for me, even though, like I said, in my 20s, I was really, you know, I started bringing the children to church and all that kind of stuff. But when Dad was sick, going through that terrible time, made me come to the understanding that what I pray for isn't necessarily what I need or what the Lord's going to give me. And so, you know, seeing what afterwards, why He had the plan He had.
Absolutely. Let's switch to Don. Don, you're here, we've established, because of Trudy's influence.
Yep.
And so pick it up from that point. How do you ended up here, and what's it been like since?
Well, yeah, I figured that it makes sense that if you want to be with the girl, you need to do things the girl does.
That's a good lesson for a man to learn.
So I started coming to the Citadel because we were dating. I mean, I didn't have any background in the Salvation Army.
Okay.
At all. None. I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic schools. I went to St. Bond's, Brother Rice, and had that education, that religious education through
Yep.
Catholicism.
Yep.
But if I look back, I can see periods in my life where, I felt the presence of God and understood it in a Catholic sense. So coming to the Citadel was really different. I mean, just the nature of the service, the degree of music, the structure is entirely different than the Catholic Mass.
Right.
And it was really interesting and really enjoyable. So it wasn't really a hardship to come, but I didn't have a robust faith. I wasn't one of the cleavers. I was probably more like Eddie Haskell, if we're going to use that analogy. But there was certain points where things did impact me. I remember Shaw Clifton at an Easter
Yes.
Good Friday service, right? It took a real impact from what he had to say on that, and really bringing things to life and manifesting God in that room for me at that time. But I guess I came to a more of a crisis of faith to some extent, exactly as Trudy did when her father became quite ill, because I couldn't reconcile what I saw in terms of the way Reg tried to lead his life, right, and
Right.
his faith being manifested in his life with what was happening to him. Because I had this and still struggle with this to an extent, a transactional view, right? Which says, okay, God, this is the deal, right? I'll do what you say, I'll follow the rules, I'll do the best I can, but in return, I'm going to get some things out of that too, and so you're going to take care of me, right? So I really found that difficult intellectually, and for me, I needed to understand what was going on. So I got into Job, which probably wasn't a really good place to start, but then John's Gospel, and then moved into, during that period, senior soldier classes,
Right.
right? And I think it was that combination of activities, plus some real interest shown in my life by people here at the Corps, particularly Brian Peddle.
Absolutely.
It wasn't coming across as this kind of mission-oriented, focused thing. We need to get Don Barnes saved. It was very relational, right? It was very much, I'm interested in you because you're a human being and you're a person who comes here and let's talk about
That's right.
things of a variety of type. So, during that period, moved from intellectual understanding and acceptance of who Jesus is to eventually an emotional, a spiritual, a heart acceptance of who Jesus is.
So, in management terms, you went from transactional to transformational.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And that transformational aspect is not a one-time thing.
No.
Right, and that I think was part of the struggle for me, because there was this kind of initial leap in, right, and then getting involved in different things in the Corps, and getting involved in reading a whole bunch of Christian literature, and kind of riding that wave a bit, and then right, and then not knowing what to do.
That's
really
when the dip comes.
When that dip comes, yeah. So that's been an ongoing reality, I think.
We hear it all the time, but until you experience it, it's really a challenge to come to terms with the notion that this is a daily walk. It's a daily walk, right? I mean, where I am today is not necessarily where I'm going to be tomorrow in my faith walk. I mean, Lord knows what's coming at me. He knows, and thank goodness he does. But, you know, over the course of time, you know, when you go to battle with the Lord enough times and you live long enough to have these various experiences, there's a trust that builds, I find, which is the idea that, you know what, I've been here before. Circumstances were different, but he was here. I'm here now. He's with me, and he's got the outcome already in his mind, and I just need to trust. Hard to do, though. Hard to do.
Very hard.
Well, thank you for getting into that aspect of walk, and we may touch again on it. Your family, all grown up now, right? So catch us up. Where are they? What are they doing?
Well, Caroline got married last summer.
Wow.
And she lives just off Topsail Road here in town, her and Zach. And she's a clinical psychologist, and he's a med lab with the Eastern Health. So they're very settled,
Good.
which is great. And Stephanie is in Toronto, and she lives in Toronto. She went away to Toronto when she went to do her Bachelor's of International Relations. She finished all that. Then decided she wanted to be an actress. So she is now acting.
And now for the other side.
That's right. Let's go with a completely
Great.
different view. So she just finished a part in a movie.
Good.
And but she's also working with the Canadian. I'm going to get this wrong. What's the name?
Canadian Hearing Services.
Canadian Hearing Services, and so that's her day job, and then the acting as well. So she's keeping very busy.
A whole different thing. I mean, my own experience comes in here too. The whole different thing with your children as adults. When they were little, that's one thing, and then adolescence, that's another, and now they're adults, right? So learning to work with your adult children and all of that kind of stuff. But you know, talk about the transitions through all those years and phases, and from the concept of what role did faith play in that for you? Because being a parent, I mean, that's
It's
no
not
cakewalk.
easy. It's not easy. Actually, I was actually a little while ago, I said to my brother when he had a teenage girl, and I said, you either love him or you kill him, so there's your choices. Pick which one you want. Because it's not an easy time in life. And we did something really different by uprooting our children and taking them to Qatar right in the middle of the teenage years. So it was a really difficult time for them then, because when we left here, the church was their whole family, and they spent, I'd say, every evening of the week here at the church doing something. They were either in singing lessons, or they were in the songsters, or they were in the Corps Cadets, or whatever. They were here almost every night, and then we uprooted and went to the Middle East. Completely different environment. And church was different. It was house church. There was no churches when we went there first. And so it was a completely different environment for them and difficult for them, but they've come out stronger with a different worldview because of that experience, and both of them are strong, independent women, and you know, well-founded. Even the other night, Stephanie was saying, "I'm struggling sleep," and I said, "Well, pray through it. Pray through it."
If you're going to be awake, put it to good use.
That's
Pray.
right. I said, you got to pray, you leave it with the Lord, and go to sleep. Right?
Well, your take on any of that, Don?
Yeah, I think that Trudy's right when she says that the decision to go to Qatar was a very challenging one, I think, for all of us, but a very, very good choice for us. And I think that, you know, with respect to faith through that period, it was really interesting because, you know, Caroline's 4 years older than Stephanie, and she had been through Corps Cadets and those sorts of things here. You know, give a lot of credit to Brian Adams, actually,
well, of course.
Around giving Caroline the tools to deal with, you know, issues and struggles through her teenage years, but even as an adult. Stephanie, being younger, didn't have
That's
kind
so
of
great.
that
No.
length of time,
Yes.
kind of going through the various programs.
And she was at
here
a
the
different
Core.
stage of her life too,
She was
right?
only 11,
Yeah, she was 11. But I think one of the things that happened during that period was, at least, and I can't really speak for the impact on the girls, but I can speak about the impact for me, was getting exposed to yet another way of coming to worship and coming to how you express your relationship with God. Because going to these house churches, they were kind of non-denominational, but there were two. One was very charismatic, Pentecostal in its style, and the other really came out of more Baptist traditions, neither of which I had really any exposure or experience to. So it was really interesting to be able to do that, and I think we kind of went back and forth for a while, and then eventually settled into one, which I think we felt was probably a little more within our comfort zone. But for me, it was the ability to see two or three things. So one is that there are different expressions, and there are different ways. But the other is that a real reality check on something that Scripture says, right? That no matter where you go, you can't get away from God.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are in a Muslim country, right, where officially there's no Christian churches. Right. There was a lot of support from the state, in terms of allowing for different expressions of worship and movement even through legal structures to support, particularly worship by Christians within the country. There's a lot of foreigners providing the labor force in Qatar through the oil and gas industry, or through the college, or all those sorts of things. And realizing that it didn't matter kind of where we were or what was going on, that God was already there when we got there. And I still now have the same sensation whenever we sing that song, "This is though I walk through the desert place." Well, we were in the desert place, right?
Literally.
And so that sense, I got even get a little bit of goosebumps here now saying it, but that sense that literally you can be in that desert place. It's okay, right? Because God's already there. Right?
Absolutely.
And so that, I think, experience was really one of those more important steps. Like you take a lot of steps on your journey. Some of them have more impact and more meaning than others.
No, well, yes.
That was one of those for me that really made a difference.
And we had a Bible study at our house, and a lot of Newfoundlanders over there, so a lot of Pentecostal Salvation Army in the Bible study. We still got relationship with some of those people, but you always have that after you've lived with people for 5 years.
You do.
And we, as a group, 14 of us, I think it was, when we went to Jordan, and we asked them to certain biblical sites we wanted to go to. It wasn't their regular tour, right? And being where John was baptized,
Right.
and just where Moses hit the rock, and just visiting all those sites. For us, that was our history, right?
Of course.
Right.
Excellent. That diversity of experience adds so much to the fabric of the whole. At the end of the day, when you look back, you can draw from this and this and this and this and see and trace God's hand and God's leading and God's purpose and all of those things. Great. In the world of work, I retired a long time ago, and you're fairly new at it, and you're just getting your toes wet. But the years of work are wonderful in many ways, and it's I haven't met too many people say I missed the job, but I missed the people that I worked with and the relationships that I formed. Being a follower of Christ as you go through the world of work, interacting with all kinds of different people, some who share your belief structure, others who may not, and then the pressures and the kind of leadership positions you've been in. Can you speak a little bit to the role of faith to help stabilize you through the work years? I'll start with you, Don.
Sure. I think that the reality around work and faith is largely, well, we talked a little earlier. I think it's easier to keep a mask on in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
I think that my experience has been, I think, in every place that I've worked since I became a Christian. People have known that I'm highly involved in church, and I probably knew that I taught led Bible study
Right.
and all those sorts of things. So it's never been secret. But I think it's a lot easier, or there's a tendency, maybe might be a better word, my tendency. I only speak about myself. To keep up the pretense that everything's really, really good, right? That in my own life everything kind of works, and I don't know that necessarily helped in terms of showing people what a life in Christ is really like. I don't necessarily think that there was everything was negative about that, right? I mean, I do know I have had feedback from people over the years which says, how I dealt with situations or how I approached them and my demeanor and those sorts of things, people can see something in that. So, despite my own failings and weakness, the Spirit is still there and evident and present, right? I think that where it mattered most, though, for me, was when things were difficult and when things were challenging, and when you didn't quite know what to do or you were struggling with a particular situation, being able to take a step back and make it a matter of prayer and make it a matter of some contemplation and looking for God's guidance on what do I do about this, and not that I never got a sign or a vision or some tangible expression of what to do, but I generally felt that there were certain touchstones I could go back to, right? So I could say, what are the expectations, I think, what are God's expectations of me in this circumstance? So I could say, well, it is about being, principled, about
Yes.
approaching from a perspective of integrity, of trying to do it from a perspective of love and concern for the other people who were going to be
Impacted.
affected by
Yeah.
a decision or who were engaged in it, also engaged in this situation. So I think that that afforded me the means of getting through. It didn't necessarily solve the problem. It didn't necessarily lead to a positive outcome. And that's probably what I've struggled with and still struggle with the most, is this notion of trusting God, because I want to trust God to give me what I want. Right? That's easy. I can.
But
Right?
it's going to give you what you need.
And and I struggle even with that notion a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because like I say, what should I really trust God for? And I think the most difficult thing, but for me the right thing to think about, and what I need to trust God for, is that He will be there with me regardless of what happens. And I find that really, really hard, because I don't like the regardless of what happens part. I want it to work out. But we look at the Bible, it didn't work out for everybody.
No, and some of us that have certain personality types, where Stephen Covey says, you see the end from the beginning and all that kind of stuff, right? there's some comfort in that, but there's a bit of a controlling thing going
Yeah.
on in there.
Yeah.
And some of us have to get that matter of the will, put it
Yeah.
off on a sidebar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Oh, and that's the difficult. As you can imagine from our positions, we're both like planning, control.
Right.
So that part of getting out of God's way
Yeah.
and letting Him work,
Yes.
right? When you always have to have a plan. Even coming here today, I was like, how come I need the questions. I need to prepare my answers. And then I just needed to pray is what I needed to do instead of
How's
that.
it working so far for you?
So far, it's pretty good.
All right,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
right, good.
Yeah, but that is the biggest part. It's that control, and at work, like same as Don, it's people know that you're a Christian, and you need to show the values, but they also need to know that you struggle with it. And many times I've had to say, this is really really difficult situation for me, right?
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And because you have to make some hard decisions. and things, right?
Make a comment like this I'm about to make. Christians, being a Christian is not for the faint of heart. It's not, as we've said, it's not a cakewalk. It's not, okay, God, you got it, and roll out the red carpet and let me walk down it. That's not life. That's not real life,
Right.
and it's a struggle within the context of the circumstances that life sends to you. And so here we are, day by day, subjecting ourselves in a positive way to saying, okay, how are you with me today? How are we getting through this today?
Right, and in that context, the question becomes, is that why bother? Right, like someone who,
Yes, why bother?
if I think back about, kind of before I was saved, that's a very real question about what difference does it make if I get involved in this thing, if I follow this path a little further, right? Like I know for me, there was a focus on, well, what are the things that I think I'm going to lose, right? That I think
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
going to end up giving up,
Yep.
right? One was scotch, right? And that was, it seems silly now, but it was a something that I kind of struggled with. Not that I, struggled with alcoholism or anything, but just this notion of, I really enjoy this. This Salvation Army crowd don't. So how's that going to work out,
Yeah.
right? But that's transactional again, right? It's then, because then my head turned to, well, what do I get? What do I get? And I worry sometimes that we make this emphasis on salvation and eternal life and make it sound like a bargain, right? That it's transactional, whereas when you start to really think about it, there's this act has taken place on the cross and through the resurrection, that if we make that transactional, we really cheapen that, right? Mm-hmm. So then what is it that this Christian life gives us? And I think that the answer is that it gives us the ability to live and grow and mature in relationship with God, which that's the life more abundant, right? Not the things that we have, and not what we get, and not whether we're prosperous or not. And I think one of the things that I struggle with, and I think we struggle with collectively in a place like St. John's Citadel, is that we're very kind of comfortable middle class people by and large, right? And it becomes real easy to equate that material and personal success with the relationship that we've had with God. Right?
Yes, we can get a little wrapped in a cocoon, as opposed to pushing away from the cocoon and exploring new vistas with God.
Yeah.
Because what are you doing Sunday? I'm going to church. Why? Because I always go to church.
Right. And what should we be doing, getting, experiencing, giving in terms of that relationship we have with God. Like our relationship is not stagnant,
No.
right? It's changed and grown and deepened and developed over years.
Yes.
Shouldn't that happen with my relationship with Christ as well?
One would think.
And so how do we get there? How do we make that happen? I think that's the big part about how we live.
For me, one of the things I really noticed through this COVID years is the difference when you're home watching a service is not the same as being in the service, right?
Right.
It's just the whole.
It's an acceptable substitute.
You can
but-
do it because you need to do it, and we're very COVID conscious with Mom and his mom, but coming to the service, it's a feeling in the service. It's how it hits your heart.
Yeah.
Right?
The word intentionality is in my mind as I listen to you both. You talked about your relationship is growing. Well, if you weren't intentional about it,
Right.
it wouldn't, right? Similarly, with the relationship with God, if you're not intentional about it,
Yeah.
ho hum,
Yeah.
it will be ho hum.
That's right.
So, yeah. All right. So, where to from here? I mean, you don't have a crystal ball. You haven't had a vision of some sort yet, have you? So it's the retirement years, and what's in the offing?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think, like a lot of things, like a lot of people, we say, oh, yeah, well, we'll travel. Well, not yet. So, and we're in transition on other things now as well. We're trying to sell our house, downsize, and, do those sorts of things as well. So there's some degree of unsettling activity
And
going
a lot
on.
of prayer happening.
And I think that's a big part about what we do with the future. But I think that there's things that we've kind of always wanted to do or pursue or look at from a hobby perspective that we never ever did. I mean,
No time.
we basically spent our time at the church or time at work. Since we've been back from Qatar, that kind of changed a bunch of things and disrupted a bunch of things. But when we came back from there, I mean, we both started to move into more senior positions, right? And became much more engaged and busy around that. It certainly wasn't just a kind of 9-to-5 roles for either of us. A lot of travel. And travel for work is glamorous the first time. It's no fun when you're doing it a lot,
No.
right? I mean, it's work.
That's right.
So I don't know that that's fully clear for
Fair
us
enough.
yet. I mean, I know. Like, I got a list of things that I'm interested in. She's got a list
I got
of
a
things
list.
that she's interested in.
Maybe the better
About
way.
one of those things on my list is to get closer to God and pray more and be more involved in the church. So that's one of the things. He doesn't know yet because he hasn't seen my list and I haven't seen his list yet. We're still working through that.
Surprise.
But I think like on that focus, the last little while now, I've been reading and I actually discovered a podcast that I'll actually give a plug for because I think it's really, really interesting. The Bible for Normal People. And the reason I find it interesting is related to something you said, Derek, which is that without the intentional approach, there's a stagnation. And one of the things that creates stagnation is familiarity, right? So unless we see a different dimension of God or have a different perspective brought in, it's familiar, right? We know the stories, we know what they mean, we know the interpretation, we know how they apply. Well, one of the things that I'm learning now through been listening to these things and reading some books is that there's a whole host of other ways of looking at this, right? There's ways of thinking about and approaching and engaging with Scripture that aren't the typical traditional thing that we've heard or been told. It doesn't negate those things that we've heard or been told, but it should add something else so we can say, oh, that's an interesting way of thinking about God. What does that mean then for me? What does that mean for how I respond to that information?
You've just segued into our final question, and that's great. And that is daily faith, the daily practice of faith now in your lives. And you've helped us with a little bit of that. I'm sure you'll tell us a bit more. But maybe, Trudy, you can pick up that thread and talk a little bit about that as we conclude.
Yeah, I'm right now, like I said, with retirement and that is one of the things on my list. And so I've always regularly prayed. But I know my mom always does devotions every morning and writes in her journal about all the people she's praying for and that. And I'd like to start that practice because I wasn't one to write a journal or anything like that. I mean, I'm a daily bread and that I did and everything like that. But I'd like to do more towards that. Myself and Don have started walking, so he tells me all about the podcast. And we had a big discussion the other day about, the prodigal son story and all that type of thing. So, I think, the main thing is trying to come to grips with what we were just talking about, is allowing the Lord to work and figuring out what His plan is for my life, and every day trying to do that, right?
Absolutely.
Because we have plans,
Yep.
but that doesn't mean that's His plan.
That's right. That's
Right.
He has
So
an interesting way of letting us know. What his
Yes,
plans
yeah,
are.
what
Yeah.
His plans are. So I'm really praying, trying to, okay, you have to show me, what is your plan? What do you want me to do, right?
I like what Trudy said about that discipline of a regular engagement. Because I've always been a bit of a gadfly, like I'm really curious, and I'll bounce around from thing to thing to thing. But I think that's a really good point that's actually been on my mind in the last little while. I have to kind of sit down, and when I'm looking at something or reading or going through Scripture, to have a notebook there and to actually really engage with the text and not just kind of gloss over it or kind of just think about it in the way that it is been presented to me in the past, right? And I think we can think about the world around us as well as the other big area for me over the last few years has been really a growing concern and urgency around issues of social justice and that's a big tradition in the Salvation Army,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
It's historically the driving force about for the booths around people in poverty and the
All the
conditions
way
that
back
people
to the
lived
match
in.
factory, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to create a lot of change and a lot of challenge for the Army, for this Corps, as we start to grapple with some of those issues. And how do we reconcile what we see happening around us in the world as the world changes,
Yep.
right? And how do we respond to that? And how do we respond to that in a way that's consistent with what we believe and with what we understand of who God is, and what the direction God has laid out for us. In this podcast, listening to something where a Jewish scholar talking about the Old Testament, he said, if you put aside what the questions, and within Judaism there's a range of perspectives, if you put aside all the questions, what is the overriding command from God in the Old Testament? And he said it's to love God. That's very clear. And he said love your neighbor. That's what Jesus said, right? All of the prophets, right? Jesus says all of the prophets, all of the Scripture, everything that we've been told can be summed up as love God and love your neighbor. So there's this huge consistency between old and new that I don't think we can get away from. So if we really believe that, and if that's really what we're being told, how should I act?
And to add to that as we conclude, coming out of the pandemic, those who are close to research on church life and where we're going from here, I've heard this mentioned a couple of times. You know, the church emerging from COVID, in the global context that you're alluding to, probably the closest thing to the New Testament church since the New Testament church.
Interesting.
It's an interesting, another little strand to explore sometime. Thank you very much for being with us and doing this. It's been a pleasure, and congratulations on your retirement and wherever and whatever the future holds. The good news is you know who holds the future. So thank you very much.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
you.